Well, good morning and hello to everyone. We've got a great session lined up for you today with McKayl Turner, who is one of our technical cloud engineers. She's a previous intern at Amazon Web Services, and she's going to spend a little bit of time today talking about how to identify security issues. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to McKayl. McKayl, welcome, and we'll have you present.
Thanks. Let me share my screen. All right. Can you guys see my screen?
We got it.
Awesome. Let's get started. Yeah, so today we're going to be talking about detecting and also some tips for preventing malicious activity in AWS. Just a little bit about me. So I'm a cloud engineer intern at NephōSec, and I work with customers at NephoSec to help them implement security best practices. So I do a lot of consulting work and also actually help them implement, which is my favorite part. Prior to joining NephōSec, I helped lower compute costs by 60% in an organization I worked for, and I've also implemented cloud security procedures in 2 large organizations. And then, like Thomas said, I also interned at AWS as a cloud consultant, and there I learned how to implement cloud best practices while also keeping customers' needs in mind. So now onto the part that you guys actually came to hear about. So when we talk about cloud security, there's really 3 layers that we need to be thinking about. There's the cloud layer, the network layer, and then the device layer. So we're going to start out talking about the cloud layer. When talking about security in AWS, it's really important to know about this AWS service level agreement. So AWS takes responsibility for security of the cloud. So this is their software and their hardware. And you as a customer are responsible for security in the cloud. So this includes your customer data, your platform applications, and your identity access management, your operating system, network and firewall configurations, and then also the encryption of your data. As you use more managed services like Lambda or Fargate, Amazon does take more of the responsibility in this model, but in general, I think this is a good delineation to know what you're responsible for securing. So my number 1 tip getting started is to actually use a group email alias with your AWS account. And even though it seems simple, I find that a lot of customers sometimes don't do this. And the reason this is important is because if your account is compromised, a lot of times AWS can actually detect this and they'll send you a notification. But if there's only 1 engineer that gets that email, the odds of you being able to remediate it in a timely manner are a lot lower than if you send it to a whole group. So we really recommend that you have a group email alias for your AWS account. And you can actually change the alias of your account if you need to. It's important to enable and monitor Cloudtrail. So AWS is run off of a series of basically API calls. And so Cloudtrail captures and records the API activity as a Cloudtrail event, and kind of grayed out in the background, you can see what those logs will look like in the console. And then you can view and download this activity. And this is a good way that if there is malicious activity in your account, you can go back and look through the trails and see, what happened and who is accessing that account. Another great way to detect malicious activity is to actually enable billing alarms. And while this will tell you, who got into your account or how they got in, it's a great way to see the symptom of something that's peculiar. So here you see that this customer's cloud costs are very consistent. But on March 1st, March 11th, and March 31st, you can see that there's some unusual dips and spikes. And so this would be a really good time to get an alert, and then you can go into your account and see, if something unusual is happening or if this is expected behavior. And in the past, this is how I've been able to detect a lot of malicious activity in my accounts, is just through billing alarms. And you actually enable billing alarms through CloudWatch, which is a service which allows you to set alerts based on different metrics. And AWS actually has 5,000 different alarm metrics that you can use to trigger these alarms. So here you can see one is like a strange user account. So a user that's inside of your AWS account that's doing behavior that's unexpected or seems strange for your alarms. To secure your cloud, first is limit users you'll really want to use least privilege and only use users that have the permissions they need, and then also make sure you don't just have users in your account that are sitting there unused, because that a lot of times leads to compromisation. Also lock down unused regions. So AWS has a large global footprint, which means that they have a lot of regions, and customers usually only use a couple of these regions. And so it's a really good idea to use AWS's service control policies and lock down the regions that you're not using. And this just lowers the footprint that you have to monitor. And a lot of time that malicious activity will happen in a region that you don't use that often, and that you're not tracking things like Cloudtrail and CloudWatch logs as frequently. Also, keep your resource limits down. So AWS has resource limits, and for example, for EC2, right, if somebody gets in your account and they want to spin up a bunch of Bitcoin servers, but you have your resource limits down for the large instance types to 0, because you don't use them that often, and if an engineer does need it, they can go in and put in a service ticket. It really limits what that malicious actor can do in your account. And I even recommend, if you have an account and you know that you're only going to be using, for example, 100 EC2 instances, to lower your service limit down to just above 100. And so if somebody does get in your account, they're not able to spin up hundreds of EC2 instances. And actually, I found in the past that you can actually put a service ticket in, and they'll put that resource limit down to 0 if you ask. You can also, a good thing is to also delete account access keys. So when you create a AWS account, that root user, which the root user is the one with all the permissions, is created with access keys. And these access keys are a lot of times not needed, and they're very permissive. And so it's good if you just go in and delete those root access keys. Next, it's important to use single sign-on when possible, and MFA always for sign-on, both with your users and also especially with your root account. And then finally, protect your root account at all costs. That's the one with the most permissions. And if somebody can get those root access credentials, a lot of your security policies aren't as effective because they can get around them. Next, we're going to be talking about the network layer. So AWS has what's called a virtual private cloud, and basically it's just a logical subdivision of the network that's isolated and that you can launch resources into. So AWS allows you to actually enable VPC Flow Logs, and what this is they're very detailed logs of all the network activity that's happening in your account as it passes through the VPC. So it allows you to know which machines are connected to your VPC and where they're coming from. And this data, coupled with the data received at Amazon's threat detection service, can help you detect intrusions. And Amazon's threat detection service is called GuardDuty. So GuardDuty actually goes in and analyzes the logs from your VPC flow logs, the Cloudtrail data we talked about earlier, and also DNS logs. And then it can intelligently detect threats from these, and based on your actions that you specify, it can take action based on those findings. Another important thing is to pay attention to open security groups. So security groups act like firewalls for your individual services, and if they're open to the world, then anybody can access that resource. So what we recommend is that you actually notify anytime there is a security group that's open to the world, and you talk to the person who created that. You can either remediate it immediately or talk and see if that's expected behavior. And then finally, it's important to protect the device layer as well. And ways to do this are to monitor your system for out-of-bound values, such as CPU usage or memory usage. And you can use CloudWatch that we talked about earlier to do that. And to also assess changes in system state, so any rewritten data or newly written data. And you can do that with Cloudtrail. And then finally, just make sure you're patching and that you have a really good schedule for that. So that's some of our tips for detecting and protecting against malicious activity in AWS. Thank you so much for being here today, and we're happy to answer any questions. And I'm actually going to escape from this presentation so I can actually see your faces.
So McKayl, one of the things you talked about in there was reducing the number of users. And so as organizations go to deploy, maybe not necessarily via the console, but through infrastructure as code, how do you best recommend that they do that? Are those individual service accounts, or how is that typically recommended?
Yeah, so in my past organizations, we've had users based on access, not, for example, McKayl, Thomas, and Susan would all have a user, right? We would have one user that gives like, for example, people console permission if they need it, or API access, and limits it down to the exact permissions they need. And then you can assign that through a single sign-on service. And that's my best recommended way to do it. And then if you do are just using users and you're using, for example, infrastructure as code, just limit that user's permissions down to exactly what that project needs, so that if somebody does get access to that user's credentials, that they're not able to do much in your account. Does that answer your question?
It does. It does.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I have a question.
Yeah.
This is Robert from Minnesota.
Hey.
What if someone were to get into your account and turn off your Cloudtrail logs?
Mm-hmm. Yes. So at that point, you do lose some, some of the granularity of being able to see exactly what's happening. But hopefully, if you do have all the other alerts set up as well, a lot of times, malicious actors are trying to get in fast and get their work done. And so for them to go and they're not, a lot of times they won't spend the time to disable Cloudtrail logs and VPC logs, and go in and turn down your billing alarms. And so usually having all of the different alerts will help you detect it. That's what I recommend. If Thomas or if anybody else has a better answer, you can
No.
into.
Great point. I mean, certainly, that's one of the things they're going to obviously try to turn off immediately, as they can, to try to cover tracks, and having those other alarms set up, I think, is a great backstop to that.
And then as a follow-up question, if I may.
Yeah.
At what scale or what size AWS environment would you say it makes sense to consider outside tools like a DivvyCloud versus managing it internally within AWS? Is there a certain, rule of thumb or volume to consider?
Yeah. I think just if you're with DivvyCloud, right, the pricing model is kind of nice because it's based off of how many VMs you have. And so if you have a smaller account, it's going to cost less. But I would say it's based off how much time you have to manage a tool. And so when you're starting to, spend enough time in clouds, that it is time that you can put those resources to have an external tool and manage and maintain that, I think that's a good time to do it. Thomas, you might have more.
Yeah, no, I think to build on that a little bit, and I think you're spot on, McKayl. I think to build on that a little bit, though, I think it also begins to think about the complexity of the team. So if you're getting into a situation where, and I don't know that there's a specific size, but as soon as you've got an organization that's trying to run multiple applications across multiple teams, and even in a single provider, I think it certainly helps, Robert, to have something like a DivvyCloud to be able to really provide that visibility. And I think one of the nice aspects in that regards too is just the whole shift left model that the team has created there to begin to be able to provide insight into the actual Terraform code itself prior to deployment, so that not only are you preventing situations, whether it's compliance, security, or cost, from getting out into the wild, it's also providing that feedback loop to the developers in the organization about what good looks like. And I think the other piece there too is it is providing you that risk visibility, if you will, around drift. So when things potentially do go wrong, whether it's a situation where the team has made a mistake or where it's actually malicious activity, you're gonna know about it and hopefully be able to remediate it. And I think it does a nice job of complementing the provider tool set.
Yeah, and that goes back to the earlier question about Cloudtrail, right? Is that if Cloudtrail is disabled, that DivvyCloud is still logging that data, and they won't be able to go in and delete that as easily or know that they need to delete that. So that's a good way. And also, I would say, like, as early as you possibly can to get those tools, so that one of the things we find is the hardest thing to fix is culture. And so the earliest you can get those tools and start, teaching good behavior in your cloud practices, I think the easier it is for your organization in the long run.
Great point. Great point.
Anything else?
Yeah, I think so. And I think And you talked a good bit about infrastructure as code, if you will, and in that VPC setup. How are you seeing folks begin to look at, and how are you thinking about in your time maybe at AWS around securing Lambda, or just really serverless?
Yeah, serverless is really great because there is less that you have to worry about securing because AWS is taking more responsibility there. So really what you're needing to secure, right? There are no security groups. There are no, like with EC2, you don't have to worry about patching. And so it takes a lot of that burden off. But you need to really make sure you're securing it, or those keys that allows you to deploy in infrastructure code, especially, right? Those pipelines all have keys and credentials. And so making sure you're rotating those frequently and securing them, because automation is great. But if we forget to take care of the tools that are doing the automation, that's when problems can occur. So that's what I would say.
Great point there. Cool. Excellent. Well, any other thoughts or questions from everyone in the audience? Well, excellent. Well, McKayl, thank you so very much. Great session, very informative, and I appreciate everybody spending the time with us this morning.
Thank you.